Hi everybody, welcome to TTFF 20 and thanks so much for joining us. This year our full film program will be screened online from September the 9th to the 15th with our new media exhibition installed at the Medulla Art Gallery in Woodbrook, Port of Spain. Don't forget you can check out our full film listings and pay for your film bundles at online.ttfilmfestival.com. We'd like to thank all our TTFF 20 sponsors and partners. TTFF 20 is given leading sponsorship by the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and the Arts, contributing sponsorship by Republic Bank Limited, with Shell Trinidad and Tobago Limited supporting TTFF 20 industry events. And I'm very pleased to welcome to TTFF Justine Henzell from Jamaica. Hi.
Hi, Bruce. So lovely to see you.
So, first of all, we're going to be talking about No Place Like Home, but I think the public needs to know a little bit about your father, the director. So can you give us a little quick bio of Perry?
Sure. So Perry was born in Jamaica. Raised in Jamaica, proud Jamaican, and he went to England, studied his craft, and came back to Jamaica when our first TV station was established. He made commercials for many, many, many years, hundreds of commercials, and was itching to make a film, a feature. And so in 1972, Jamaica's first feature film, The Harder They Come, was released. And I'd also like to take a moment to just say, rest in power to Toots, who left us last night. And of course, Toots was in The Harder They Come. And it is a great, great loss for Jamaica and for reggae music that he has passed on. So just a moment of tribute to Toots. The Harder They Come was very responsible for taking reggae to the world with an amazing soundtrack, which Toots contributed to, of course, and Jimmy Cliff being the star playing Ivan. Perry devoted many years after the release of The Harder They Come to distribution because nobody would pick up the film and distribute it. So he had to do it himself. It was very difficult, and it didn't leave him much time for other enterprises. But he was able to get some money together to try his second film, No Place Like Home, later on in the 70s. And if you can believe it, it was even more experimental than The Harder They Come was, which is hard to believe now, but back then it was.
The No Place Like Home. Yeah, I see Perry says he wanted to do something more experimental, but I don't quite see No Place Like Home as an experimental film.
Well, when you watch it, you may not realize it, but there was actually no script. So he wanted to be even more spontaneous than he was with The Harder They Come. So with The Harder They Come, he would set up a scene, and most of the actors were not actors at all. They were not trained, they were characters. And so a lot of the time they came up with their own dialogue once he had said what he wanted the scene to convey. In No Place Like Home, he took that to another level. The story is about a TV executive from New York, a woman who comes to Jamaica to make a commercial. So Perry actually contracted a production company in New York to come to Jamaica and make a fictitious shampoo commercial, which he then filmed them filming the commercial. It was completely fictitious, but the resulting commercial that they made actually won an advertising award because it was so convincing. So again, he wanted to do something that was completely real and authentic. And so then begins the road trip with the woman, Susan Amaro, and Carl Bradshaw, whose name in the film is Carl, going on a road trip around Jamaica. So a very different film, a different feel from The Harder They Come.
But in some ways, it's a bit of an advert for Jamaica and for Newton in the grill area and so on.
It's absolutely a love letter to Jamaica. And when you look at Negril of the 1970s and you see the 7 Mile beach completely pristine and untouched, not a hotel in sight, many people watching it today, you know, as part of Trinidad Film Festival would never ever, Jamaicans would never have seen that beach the way it's portrayed in No Place Like Home. Many parts of Jamaica that are captured in that film no longer exist in that way. And a lot of what the film talks about has come true. It has been very prophetic. And again, it wasn't Perry being prophetic. It was the actual people speaking that brought that to the light.
Because one of the main themes seems to be the beginnings of commercialization and development in this part of Jamaica. And again, yeah, and at the ending, well, we don't tell people what happened at the end, but it's Carl Bradshaw's goes from being a beach boy to a hotel owner, you know.
Right, a hotelier. It's really Perry wanted to tell 3 stories. He had a trilogy in mind, Bruce. How Do They Come was a country boy comes to town when Ivan comes to Kingston. Then No Place Like Home was a city woman comes and discovers Jamaica and herself in the process. And then Power Game, which never actually ended up on screen, but was a novel that Perry wrote, was the clash between the spirit of the country and the spirit of the city. And the reason that Power Game never happened, and the reason that No Place Like Home is only now being seen by audiences, it had its premiere last year at Brooklyn Academy of Music in New York, is because the footage got lost. And it was such a tragedy for Perry, having put all his money and energy into the film, to have the footage lost, that he gave up on film. And that is why for all these decades, we've only had The How Do They Come. And now we only have The How Do They Come and No Place Like Home. And we don't have an entire library of work by Perry Henzell. And that's because that footage was lost for decades and he couldn't face the idea of that happening again.
So the shoot in early 1970s, that happened straight after The How Do They Come. It kind of stopped because of lack of money, mainly.
Exactly. So just like The How Do They Come, which stopped and started many times because he ran out of money, No Place Like Home also had similar constraints. So he had done a couple shoots and he had put the film in storage in New York. In those days, we're shooting on actual film, so it had to be stored properly. And he had cobbled together some more funds for another shoot and went to New York to pick up the footage. And when he arrived at the storage facility, they showed him a film that was not his film. And he said, "That's not my footage." And they said, "Yes, it is. See, it says No Place Like Home." And he said, "That's a porn film. That's not my film." Even though anybody who has seen No Place Like Home has to say that the sex scene is pretty amazing. But still, not a porn film. And he was completely devastated and basically turned his back on film at that moment.
And 10, 20, 30 years later, it got found.
Exactly. I had done quite a bit of work calling around labs, seeing if they knew anything of it. They didn't. And then when Island Records was sold to Universal and Universal was sold to Polygram, they were doing an inventory of all the things that they had. And the footage surfaced because it had been filed away under part of the Island catalog. So very, very fortunately, Perry was able to see the footage. He was able to work with a few amazing people, but one man in particular, David Goranzik, out in Los Angeles, to restore the footage. We did a insert shoot in the 2000s, and he was able to do a rough cut, which was shown at Toronto Film Festival in 2006 as a work in progress. And he was able to do that. We showed No Place Like Home work in progress in September 2006, and Perry passed on in November 2006. And I really feel like he was holding on until he had got No Place Like Home to a certain state of completion.
He died the night before the screening at Flashpoint.
He did. He died the night before we screened it in Jamaica for the first time, yes. And we continued, and it was screened.
It's very hard to compare the film to The Harder They Come. The Harder They Come is now the Caribbean classic film. How would you rate No Place Like Home compared to the first film?
Well, Perry preferred it. You can never be the first again. So Harder They Come will always have a special place, I think, in the canon of Jamaican film, and indeed Caribbean cinema. The soundtrack for The Harder They Come is consistently rated one of the best soundtracks ever. No Place Like Home is completely different. It has a different kind of soundtrack. It has reggae, but it also has rock. So it's like, for Perry, it was his favorite child, but I'm not sure I could choose between the two of them. They're so different, Bruce.
I hear you had a lot of problems clearing music for the final screenings.
Which is one of the reasons why it's taken decades. When Perry picked songs by Carly Simon and John Denver, and he wasn't picking with an idea about what the licenses were going to cost. It's an amazing selection of songs, but at the time we just couldn't afford to license them. There was no way. But thankfully, the Marley family came on board with a very reasonable price for licensing the Marley tracks. And we used that as leverage for the other people to come on board as well. That worked. And we were able to license the music. But that's another reason why it took so long to be released.
And Chris Blackwell was involved?
Chris was not as involved in No Place Like Home as he was with The Harder They Come. No. He had enough of experimentation at that point. Remember, at that point, Harder They Come was still not a commercial success in any way. So Perry was going even further to the fringe without having a commercial success behind it. So there were very few people that were willing to back him.
You had to do a kind of a reshoot in 2003, 2004, that kind of era. Chris Brownie was involved with that. So there was a bit of a family affair.
It was absolutely a family affair. That's a good thing when you don't have any money. If you have family and somebody who knows how to turn on a camera, it's very useful. So yeah, it was, I got the chance to work with my father for the first time. Sarah Manley was part of that team. And it actually was really a magical time to travel around Jamaica with Perry, filming these inserts. Not that many actually made it into the final edit, but I treasure the time that we spent together. Perry was an actor's director. He let people like Chris Brownie worry about lighting and angles and all of that stuff. And he was really completely obsessed with the performance. That's what he wanted. He wanted to get the best performance possible. And let the technicians handle the technical side.
Being slightly critical now, there seem to be a few gaps or holes in the story.
Sure.
Yes?
Mm-hmm.
That
yes.
was because you...
Yes.
And that was because...
And that was because this is being cobbled together over decades with different shoots happening. Again, just like The Harder They Come, but this time we didn't always have the benefit, or at the end, we didn't have the benefit of Perry for the final edit. there's actually an entire storyline that was shot at one point in the 70s that does not even enter. I think there are a few shots in it. You may have noticed Winston Stoner enters, right? So there's a whole storyline that didn't make it into what you're seeing now. Yeah, it feels almost European in its genre, not very Caribbean.
Because when Perry was talking to me about it, before it was finished, he said it was more of like a mystery, somebody had got kidnapped, or
I don't remember that part at all.
No, well, he was trying to give the impression of the film, and the person kind of got lost, but she seemed to be having a great time.
Oh yeah, there was no kidnapping there. PJ was very willing to be whisked off to Negril, but it gives the Susan character a reason to go on her own journey of discovery. So I think Countryman's performance is fantastic in it. It was actually filmed before the movie Countryman was done. So this was the first time Countryman was ever on screen. And it's also the first time that Grace Jones was ever on screen. And I think that it's a very tiny piece, but she just shines through the screen.
Have you spoken to her recently?
I saw her not that recently, a year ago, and she still looks exactly like she did and then. Amazing.
So we've mentioned some of it, but what would you say are the main themes of the film?
I think self-discovery is a big one, being true to oneself, and the fact that you can have not much in the way of material possessions, but if you are fully possessed of who you are as a person, that in itself is a huge strength. And that is what this New Yorker coming to Jamaica discovered, that she was not being true to herself at all. And here were people who had a lot less than her, but were fully themselves, living their lives, not being dictated by someone else's perception of who they should be. Very comfortable. Carl thought he was going to go and run in the Olympics. That didn't happen. He was okay with that, right? He was okay with being the most famous man in Negril. He didn't have to be the most famous man because he won, the 100-yard at that point dash. And
he is He is a sprinter. He's an athlete.
Absolutely.
In real life.
Absolutely. And he's still going strong. God bless him. I think so that, and I think the question about development at what cost is a huge one. Back in the 70s, we weren't talking about climate change, but in a way, it's a very environmentally aware film. It's saying, do you want development at all costs? What does that look like? What can it do to the people? Is it worth it? It doesn't necessarily answer those questions, but it certainly asks those questions.
I think you got frozen a little bit from my end, and there was hints of corruption as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we live in a world that is prone to corruption on all levels at all times in all countries. We unfortunately in the Caribbean are not immune to it.
And yourself, Justine, what projects do you have on right now?
Actually, I have quite a few different things that I have in development. COVID has given us some time to sit and write and come up with different ideas. So one of the things that we would love to do actually is to take Power Game, which was the third story in the trilogy, and create a limited series. Back when Perry had written it, miniseries were just happening back then. You know, we didn't have anything like Netflix, but he had envisioned it as not a film, but as a limited series. So I am very interested in fleshing out. I have his notes on how he saw the series. So it's kind of interesting to go back, read the novel, revisit his notes, and imagine what that series could be in a time where streaming services are looking for content.
That sounds something to look forward to. I have an autographed copy of the book from Perry, which was nice. So I must read it as well.
There are some great characters in that film. In that book. See, I'm already imagining it. I'm already visioning it. But yeah, you know, Perry was a better filmmaker than he was a writer. He wrote the book, and you can see it as on the screen because he just wrote that way.
And No Place Like Home, what's the future for it?
Well, again, streaming services are looking for content. So we have a distributor. We have, they're looking for a home for it currently. Harder They Come was just released on Blu-ray last year, and No Place Like Home is on that Blu-ray collector's edition. Harder They Come is also, it was on Criterion Channel for a few months, and now it's going to be on Showtime starting the end of September. So Harder They Come certainly lives on, and No Place Like Home is quietly making its own name for itself, and we're looking for a home for that as well.
Well, Justine, thanks very much for letting us have the privilege to show your film, No Place Like Home. We had wanted to show it, I think, a couple of years ago, but I think at that point you were in the midst of post-production.
Exactly. David Goranzik and his team and Arthur Gorson, they were busy trying to beg, borrow, and steal people to fix sound and fix negatives. And the story of that, the odyssey of getting No Place Like Home to the point it's at, is actually also showing at your festival. So if anybody is interested in a saga of how a film can get rediscovered 30 years later and make it to festivals like Trinidad, I recommend that they watch that.
So once again, thanks, Doc, and try to catch some of the festival.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Take care.
Bye, Justine.
Bye.